Welcome to Discograffiti's 2025 Patreon membership super drive. Now more than ever with our Beach Boys series underway, much of which will be living exclusively on our Patreon platform, this is the time to join, and I'm going to make it super easy for you. At the lieutenant or major tier, in addition to 3 or 4 shows a week, access to the gigantic archive of Patreon back episodes, and your backstage pass, you'll also get the following. An onboarding call with me during which you'll tell me all your ideas on how to make the podcast you'd like to hear. And whether I use all, some, or none of your ideas, I'll have listened closely and most importantly, gotten to know you. Plus, 3 months into your membership, you'll be eligible to appear on the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's right, an entire episode all about you, your band, your band's album, your band's tour, or whatever other cool stuff you might be up to. And not only do we make the episode, we promote it for you too. Last but not least, you'll receive a completely free digital copy of Metal Machine Muzak, which otherwise costs $11. Metal Machine Muzak is Discograffiti's double album Lou Reed tribute featuring 16-minute pieces by Lou Barlow from Sebadoh and Dino Jr., Corey Hansen from Wand, Mark Robinson from Unrest, and W. Cullen Hart from Olivia Tremor Control. Please tell all your music-obsessive friends. In fact, if your friends do sign up, be sure to email me at info@discograffiti.com and let me know who they are, because I'll be sending you an additional surprise gift on top of everything else as a token of my gratitude. And now, without further ado, the greatest music commentary podcast in all the land, I bring you Discograffiti.
I guess every generation has their sense of when it was then, it was the greatest time ever. But certainly in terms of rock and roll, I got to say it's probably true. Maybe the music will be much different as it is in the 21st century. But that sense of hope, I mean, that's really what Nuggets is about. You know, I'm a kind of weird mutant New Jersey teenager, really interested in science fiction and geeking out on this or that or the other thing. And I found a possibility in picking up an electric guitar and plugging it in. You know, I wasn't a sports guy. I wasn't even that good at school. But all of a sudden, I understood who I could be, that sense of elevation and possibility. And the music kind of encouraged that.
Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series, And Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 45 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to Jeff McAvoy and especially co-producer Dennis Diken, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Little Deuce Coupe, along with our special guests, Lenny Kaye and Dennis Diken, not to mention one very special surprise cameo. Here's just a few of the many things that Lenny and Dennis discuss in this podcast. The incomparably insane recording and release schedule under which the Beach Boys were working in the fall of '63, the yearning reach and sense of possibility inherent in the early 1960s, and how that wound up embedded in the grooves of the Little Deuce Coupe LP, what Mike Love once told Dennis Ballad of Old Betsy may have been about, Lenny's favorite Beach Boys LP, the absolute necessity of doo-wop music and car culture at that time, and the live, in-the-moment discovery that Lenny and I are actually fraternity brothers. Keep in mind, more than 50% of Discograffiti's Beach Boys series will be available exclusively on our Patreon platform, as I support a wife and a 6-year-old son with Discograffiti as my sole source of income. So if you're not a subscriber on the Lieutenant or Major tier, you'll only be getting a fraction of the story. If you're a Beach Boys superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 24 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, but the Major tier is what you want if you want it all. And I'm covering a bunch of these Beach Boys records on the Major tier. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. Also, if you don't want to sign up for Discograffiti's Patreon, but you want every single episode of Season 1's Beach Boys series, just go to patreon.com/discograffiti, click on Collections, and you can buy the entire thing without committing to any monthly subscriptions. Coming up, we've got Al Jardine, Marilyn Wilson, Don Was, Ginger Blake, Pete Buck, Ira Kaplan from Yola Tango, The Cars' Elliot Easton, Sonic Boom, Don Fleming, Marshall Crenshaw, Russ Titleman, Jerry Schilling, Greg Jacobson, Christian Love, Gary Griffin, David Beard, Probing Gregory, John Cowsill, David Leaf, Don Randy, John Stebbins, Rob Bonfilio, Wyatt Funderburk, Stephen Kalinich, Matt Jardine, Fred Vale, Sam Parker, Brent Wilson, Mark Lynette, Alan Boyd, Carly Minoz, and many more. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. Today's first guest is a drummer, DJ, author, music historian, and founding member of the Smithereens, the band he formed in 1980 with Pat Denizio, Jim Babjack, and Mike Mazzaros in Carteret, New Jersey. He's been a constant member of the band since 1980, but has also found consistent work as a session drummer since then as well. He's recorded or toured with, among others, Ronnie Spector, Dave Davies, Nancy Sinatra, Mary Weiss of the Shangri-Las, Joey Ramone, R. Stevie Moore, Jeffrey Foskett, and Benny King. On December 18th, 2015, during a Dave Davies show in London, it was he at the kit, while Ray Davies joined his brother on stage for You Really Got Me. It was the first time the two Kinks had performed together in nearly 2 decades. His album Late Music arrived in 2009, featuring Andy Paley, the great Andy Paley, Jason Faulkner, and the Honeys on backing vocals. As a liner notes author and reissue project researcher, this man's contributed to numerous compilation albums, including collections of The Four Freshmen, Louis Prima, The Lovin' Spoonful, The Four Seasons, and The Beach Boys. He's had articles published in USA Today and EQ magazine, has contributed to the Billboard Encyclopedia of Record Producers, and been a fill-in DJ on WFMU. He's also a co-producer on this series that you're currently enjoying, Discograffiti's The Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True. And when I say I couldn't have done it without him, I really, really mean it. He's been absolutely essential. He's as good a person as I've encountered in my entire life, and his name, lads and ladies, is Dennis Diken.
Thank you very much, David.
Now today's second guest. He's a guitarist, composer, and writer. His first gig was 60 years ago with the Vandals at Alpha Sigma Phi on November 7th, 1964. After releasing a 45 as Link Cromwell, he began writing for Jazz and Pop magazine and later for Fusion, Crawdaddy, Melody Maker, Cream, and Rolling Stone. He served as the New York correspondent for a British weekly publication called Disc, and also as the editor for Rock Scene and Hit Parader. While working at a record store on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village, this man crossed paths with a woman named Patti Smith. On February 10th, 1971, he backed her at a reading at St. Mark's Church on East 10th Street, opening for what I'm assuming was a whip-gripping Gerard Malanga. He then thankfully authored a 1972 anthology of 1960s garage rock called Nuggets, Original Artifacts from the First Psychedelic Era, 1965 to 1968, which has since spawned an entire cottage industry of offshoot box set collections, all of which I own. He resumed performing with Patti again in November 1973, produced her debut single, Hey Joe, backed with Piss Factory, and played a crucial role in the making of Horses, Radio Ethiopia, Easter, and Wave. As the Patti Smith Group's extended hiatus took hold, he started his own band, joined Jim Carroll's band, and co-produced Suzanne Vega's first two albums, along with her 1987 hit single, Luca, which was nominated for a Grammy as Record of the Year. In 1995, he reunited with Patti and has been part of her band ever since, creating 6 studio albums and participating in anniversary shows that celebrate the old Warhorse LPs. He's been nominated 3 times for Grammy Awards in the box set liner notes category. In mid-February 2018, he took over the night shift on Underground Garage. Lads and ladies who think you're cool because your mommy maybe told you so, well, think again, because this guy is cool incarnate with this CV to prove it. His powers of curation have given rise to Daydream Nation. He's a stick of dynamite with arms, legs, and a big old beating heart. Won't you please hoist him up and shower him with love? It's Lenny Kaye.
Oh, thank you so much, David. That's me in a crazy nutshell.
Did I get anything wrong there?
No. I mean, there's lots of things that I've done around that too. I mean, I love music. I love being a part of music. An astrologer once told me I'm a friend to music, and I feel privileged and honored and always blessed to wake up in the morning with music on my mind, whether I'm listening to it, playing it, writing it, or, scrounging around eBay for some records that has crossed my fancy. So, I'm just happy being in this universe of recorded sound, as they say.
Your taste is second to none. Do you have any current rabbit holes you're scampering down that we should know about?
I've actually been listening to a lot of Jamaican gospel. It's not quite reggae. It's really kind of homebrewed. They have lap steel guitars going on them, very simple songs that stick in your head within an instant. There's a label called Henry's that has really beautiful, beautiful songs. So that's my contemporary rabbit hole. I don't know if there'll be a Nuggets to accompany it, but one never knows. I'm kind of into that particular genre. And of course, whatever group crosses my mind. There's so much out there. I go to these 45 shows all the time. I was down at Revilla Grooves in Milltown the other night, inaugurating their performance space. And you look at the amount of records they have, and I like to think I know a little bit. But to be honest, maybe I know 10% of the records in this huge 500,000 45s room. And some of them are incredible. And so it's always great to pursue the great song of the moment, and of which I have too many, I must say, as all of us.
Well, what's the feeling, looking around at all of the Nuggets offshoots that your initial work begat? I mean, that must be a very strange feeling for you to have.
Well, who knew? I mean, Elektra, Jack Holzman asked me to do this album of kind of under the radar or slightly forgotten deep tracks from the 60s, many of which Elektra could have put out had they wanted to. He gave me the project. He suggested 2 or 3 songs, none of which made the actual record. Serpent Power's incredible 11-minute classic about just following tracks, a little Anthony and the Imperials track. But he gave me the project, and I was working at Village Oldies at the time, and I just put together a bunch of these, what are now known as garage bands, but then were not known as anything. I called them punk rock because they had that attitude. But to be honest, I never thought the record would come out. It was kind of self-indulgent. I put my favorite tracks on it. I wasn't trying to be comprehensive, to think that we would be talking about it 50-some years in the future. It was just kind of a record that intuitively seemed to hang together. A lot of the groups were caught in that midpoint between hit singles and what would be known as album rock. The mid-60s were really interesting because it was kind of like the Renaissance in art in Italy back a few centuries. All these incredible opportunities and genius artists, Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, the Yardbirds, everyone seeing a new palette of sound that you could embark upon, even if you had no idea how it worked. It was my growing up time. I was in what we call a garage band. I mean, we didn't make any records. I did make my Crazy Like a Fox hit single, but that was a professional songwriter's writing a folk protest song. I participated. In a weird way, it's my autobiography of being in a band. We started out playing a whole lot of Shakin' Going On and things like that in 1964. By 1967, we were sitting cross-legged on the stage, barefoot, doing raga rock to my generation. It was a great, expansive, experimental, and anything goes time. And I was able to be there first. I mean, I didn't invent this music. I just had an opportunity from Elektra, who went along with everything I hoped for in the album. They made it a double album set. I rejected 3 covers before they got that incredible Abe Gervin cover. It was just a real confluence of fate, but I actually got there first. And, this music would have been discovered in the same way that, doo-wop collections would have been discovered or any genre, and to me, the Nuggets framework you could do with any genre. I've always wanted to do a reggae Nuggets from the 1970s, that kind of moment where it moves from being Jamaican to dancehall, but it's still like beautiful songs and R&B, and it has a real personality. So I don't know. I just got there first and still buying me beers around the world. So thank you, everybody.
And one song that has actually, for years, been an emotionally moving track for both me and my wife, it's our song together, is your Uncle Larry Cusick.
Uncle Q.
Uncle Q. He wrote lyrics to A Time for Us, and Joe Pass's easy listening version of that song, for whatever reason, it has taken a front and center place in my wife and I's life. I don't know if you've heard that particular.
I haven't heard Joe Pass's, but of course I know A Time for Us. There's also Love Theme from The Godfather, Speak Softly Love. And of course he helped me become who I am because he, called up his nephew and said, would you sing me Eve of Destruction over the phone, which I did. And the next thing I know, I'm in Associated Recording Studios in Times Square. And, I'm making a record. I've never been in a studio before. I'm wearing my Pi Lambda Phi fraternity jacket.
Wait, you're in Pi Lam? We're fraternity brothers.
Really? Oh, man. That is so great.
That is so fucking random. Were you crazily hazed? I was
No. I mean, actually, Pi Lam at Rutgers was like the real outcast fraternity. We didn't even have a house.
Same with me. We were the outcasts and we didn't have a house. But at Boston University, we were crazily hazed. I mean, like arrestable offense kind of hazing.
No, we weren't. Mostly, one of the hazing things was I had to count something in Ravel's Bolero, I think some piece of percussion, But I was a fraternity band, essentially. I mean, that's what the Zoo and the Vandals were. We played all the fraternities. Terry Stewart, who used to lead the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, remembers he went to Rutgers as well, and he was the social chairman of DEEC, Delta Kappa Epsilon, the jock fraternity, and he hired the Vandals one time to play for 4 hours straight because they were going on probation, and he would give us another $25. I think we got $125 for that gig.
That's great.
And actually, things are about the same now.
Yeah.
The band gets the $125. At least we paid for gas.
I've literally never met a fraternity brother of mine out in the wild, ever.
Well, I would give you the secret handshake, but,
I remember it, actually.
But don't tell anybody.
How did you guys meet, and how long ago was that?
Me and Dennis?
Yeah.
I believe, Smithereens fan. I was a fan of his drumming. I especially like Dennis's sense of fill. You have really good fills, Dennis. And I'm a real appreciator of the drum fill. But we've really gotten very close doing some of these nugget shows. Dennis was on the most recent Golden Jubilee show at City Winery, and I think we also played Opening Up the Damned. And, we've crossed many a path on the New York musician scene and discussed, of course, some arcane details of rock and roll. We're still trying to exactly pinpoint who the drummer was on Crazy Like a Fox.
All right, well, guys, I am not a car maniac, spoiler alert. So as far as Little Deuce Coupe goes, I certainly need my equivalent of 2 Roger Christians to help me along on this journey. Let's dive in here. So when we last checked in with our boys, September 16th, 1963, Surfer Girl was released. And in October, Brian has broken off his engagement with Judy Balls. And this moment in their history, this very precise moment, may actually be the single busiest moment of music production and release scheduling in their entire history as a band. Unbelievably, just 3 weeks after the group's last LP was issued, Capitol releases yet another Beach Boys album. Let me just repeat that so it sinks in to anyone who's listening. Little Deuce Coupe, the record that we're talking about today, was released 3 weeks after the Surfer Girl LP, which is totally and completely unthinkable today. I mean, it's like science fiction. Forget about unthinkable. And as a peak, just around the bend for the rest of October, because Little Deuce Coupe comes out October 7th, 1963. 11 days later, on October 18th, which is 11 days after Deuce Coupe hits the shelf, Brian tracks Little Saint Nick and Drive-In. Little Saint Nick originally, the first version of that was laid on top of the Drive-In track, and it was just slathered with sleigh bells. And then 2 days later, the group lays their vocals down on Little Saint Nick. And then October 28th, the Be True to Your School, backed with In My Room single, is released in the U.S. And let it be noted that that version is a whole different monster than what appeared on the Be True to Your School version on the record. That's just madness. That means in less than a month and a half period, from September 16th to October 28th, they released 2 albums and a single, plus they record another single, and that single will very soon hit number 3. Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti.
Well, that's a work ethic for you, I gotta say. I mean, it is amazing, but again, you look at what the Beatles were doing at the same time. That was how records were made. You go in, you bang them out, they come out, and you're on to next month's release. it was quite a time for Capitol, wasn't it? I mean, with the Beach Boys and the Beatles going great guns, they were flush.
I think also what enabled them to get this record out in record time was the fact that in late 62, I think it was, that's when Brian became very friendly with Roger Christian, who was a DJ at a few stations, I think KRLA, but KFWB. And Roger was an interesting fellow. He's from, I think he's from Rochester or Buffalo.
Buffalo, New York, and drove when he was 14 years old, before he entered 10th grade. He went to California. He was obsessed with cars and wanted to get a California car because, of course, the roads in Buffalo are full of salt and, winter is horrible on cars. So he drove all the way to California, worked in a kind of weird restaurant, and then bought this 32 Deuce Coupe. Ford Deuce Coupe, for which he paid $370 for, and then drove back to Buffalo 2,500 miles to start high school without a license. That's loving cars.
That's amazing. So let's just give a little bit of background about this record. So, as we mentioned, October 7th, 63 is when it's released. It's 25 minutes, 25 seconds long. It peaks at number 4 and spends 8 weeks in the top 10. This is the 4th album by the Beach Boys. It is considered to be one of the earliest examples of a concept album, but I know that's an argument we can have ad nauseum as far as that line of thinking.
My feeling is that Dick Contino's Accordion Songs of Paris is the first concept album. No, I don't think of it as a concept album so much as a theme album.
Sure.
It's like, let's get a bunch of songs together a night in Tunisia or something. It's a good idea, but the fact that it really featured the custom car subculture of California was really kind of a breakthrough.
It's worth noting, too, that until this record, Beach Boys car songs like Shutdown and Little Deuce Coupe had only been relegated to the B-sides of their respective singles. They had never achieved front and center prominence in the group's aesthetic. And so what's interesting about that is when we get into talking about Don't Fuck With The Formula and slinging barbs and arrows in that particular direction, this is their first instance of fucking with the formula. It goes back to this record. They change up the surf theme. Maybe they don't abandon it for good, but certainly on this record they do.
Well, they had really explored the surf theme so backwards and forwards, but you're talking about two subcultures, especially in Southern California, which were dominant teen cultures. Surf music is kind of a little more exotic, but at that time, custom car culture across the United States was very, very prevalent. I'm a kid in Brooklyn, say, 59, 60, 61. I'm years away from having a driver's license, but I'm obsessed with custom cars because at that time, Big Daddy Roth's Rat Finks are coming out. There's so many custom car magazines. Rotting and Restyling was one. There was a whole sense of building car models, which was what I was doing, and kind of souping them up. And then I moved to New Jersey in 1960, where I actually had a garage. When I'm growing up in Brooklyn, where would I put my 57 Impala? The Bel Air. And cars and guitars, they're very symbiotic. As a matter of fact, on the Divine Nuggets notes, I have this phrase which shows my mutual obsession with cars and the music. It says, as rock and roll had been born, so it would be born again by casually nudging the old off the side of the road, making way for a hemi-headed, decked and stroked, highly combustible juggernaut of the new. Now, that's all custom car lingo. Decked and stroked is when you mill your engine block so you can create more space for the pistons to go wild. Hemi-headed is when you open up the combustion chamber so it has a kind of hemisphere on the top. Rolled and pleated naugahyde, fender skirt, wild thing. It's kind of like rock and roll style, populux, if you'd call it that. And in the 1950s, automotive style was at its peak. The 32 Ford was a hot rod, and they kind of hot rodded it up, but it was also like old school combustion, but you were able to, do things with it. Southern California was full of this. I mean, the lowriders, there's an incredible example of another kind of car subculture. And you have a kind of weather that you don't have winter. You have beautiful sun. You can cruise. You can be American graffiti. And so cars at this moment in time were probably more universal than surfing.
Right. So surfing was like the dream, in some instances, like an unattainable dream, but something toward which people could reach. But cars, everybody could get there. It was definitely a car culture. And the funniest thing about Roger and a lot of these guys is that these lyrics, a lot of these car songs, they started off as poetry. Which is so funny to me now, because now we live in a world where, to have a poem about one's Honda Accord, but the world has changed to where, I grew up loving the book and the movie Christine, and that kind of obsessive relationship with a car where, a car and a guitar are named female names. That's a bygone era. But back then, it was very much the thing.
And you could work on them. I mean, that's the thing. You can't go under the hood of a car now unless you have a degree in computer science. But, you could see where if you put the gas in and it goes through this and it goes through here and bada boom and comes out the back full of lead, you could bang away at it. And that was a great hobby for especially teenage boys. And there was a whole charisma about custom cars, metal flake paint, flames and pinstripes. It was very alluring. And so it doesn't seem to me any kind of leap. I mean, I love listening to Little Deuce Coupe because it's all about car talk, it's exotic. It's almost like Jamaican patois.
Well, actually, to coincide with the release, Capitol actually supplied American DJs and record stores with a book of car racing terms to use as a promotional tool. I don't know if it was to be able to actually talk shop when talking about the record, but, I think they were gung-ho about peering into a new subculture, and probably saw more for the reason you mentioned, that it was, something that everyone partook in, probably saw more dollars and cents in that.
And very teenage. I mean, I spent a good portion of my dissolute youth driving up and down Livingston Avenue in New Brunswick, New Jersey, slouched down in my seat. Another car that I know with some guys, so you give them a little beep, where you pull up next to a bunch of girls and say, you want to go to the bowling alley and park or whatever. There's no cruising anymore. Which is kind of one of the occupations you had as a teenager. So both of these things are very youth-driven, very kind of exciting, and seem to lend themselves well to the propulsion and the acceleration and the excitement of rock and roll. I mean, you're at this same time, you have Dick Dale playing essentially surf music at that ballroom in Southern California.
Speaking of the propulsion, let's hang here for a second and talk about the bizarrely quick gestation of this thing. So first of all, 4 of the tracks from Little Deuce Coupe had already appeared on previous albums. That's 409, Shutdown, Little Deuce Coupe, and Our Car Club. And discounting an alternate recording of Be True to Your School, no tracks from the album were issued as a single. They just kind of powered through this time. And a really strange element of this record is that the date assigned for recording all 8 of the new tracks was September 2nd, 1963. On all of the AFM contracts, the date that's in the books for all of them to have been recorded was September 2nd. I don't know if it's true or not true, or if it's Dennis, do you know anything about that specifically?
No, I believe that's the only contract. Or is there an actual contract, or is that just written as it is written that that's the case? I don't think there is a contract, because that would answer the question.
The only session date that's listed on whatever remains of the contracts, which I have not seen, is September 2nd.
I don't think there's any tangible proof of any other sessions, and it seems unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that they would do 8 complete tracks and vocals in one day. However, I mean, the compositions are pretty sophisticated in some cases, but the tracks themselves are fairly skeletal. So it makes you wonder, could they have done this in one day? I'm going to guess they didn't, but it's within the realms of
Isn't there a
possible.
Beatles album?
Yes.
They did like 8 or 9 tracks.
Introducing the Beatles was a one-day thing.
Well, 10 tracks, yes. 10 tracks were cut in one day, but those were live vocals. I'm pretty sure the Beatles were singing live. In the case of this album, there's pretty lush harmonies that I'm sure could not have been done super quick, and there was overdubs of those harmonies. So that makes you think it couldn't have been done all in one day, I don't think.
Even if the story is apocryphal, the whole vibe of this record, it's almost like what's coming to mind right now is Husker Du's Land Speed record. Like, let's just see how quickly we can do something just to challenge ourselves. However many days it was, whether 1 or 2 or 3, it was quick. It had to have been the quickest because, there's a lot of documentation as far as day-to-day events in the Beach Boys' lives. And the only date that is actually notated anywhere is September 2nd. So it was quick. Also, this was the last Beach Boys album to officially include David Marks until 2012. That's Why God Made the Radio. David appears on the back cover. Al Jardine does not, even though Al plays on the LP.
I think it's really great that they were feeling their oats. They understood the studio. Brian was really starting to figure possibilities out, that it wasn't just like going in and banging it out. And don't forget, this was the norm. In Nashville, you'd have a 3-hour session and 3 songs. Sounds ridiculous now, especially with 100 million Pro Tool tracks at your disposal. But as I remember, Crazy Like a Fox, we were just there for 3 hours. Maybe they added hand claps later. Richie Adams was running around doing, sax solos and trying to build a wall of sound, but it went quick. Also you're dealing with good musicians.
What I was getting at before, and I think what really greased the wheel on this album, was the fact that because Brian had started writing with Roger Christian and Roger had all these poems already constructed, it was easy for Brian to go with that flow and get these songs done and have them ready to go rather than waiting for inspiration per se or to get together with Mike to write songs. They had this bag of songs and they were all car songs. We got to make another album quick. Here, we got these. Let's move.
Right. Yeah.
And it probably helped them form the theme too. What great timing. Like you said, Lenny, they had exhausted the surfing thing, but we got this other bag and let's roll with it.
Which even has cool, you don't have Hang 10 and Doheny and all those other surfing things. Yeah. You have all this car lingo, which is so evocative and so kind of subcultural. But Roger Christian is a really interesting guy. You sent me last night, Last Drag, the song which became Shutdown. Yeah. And actually the label, as I discovered in my own rabbit hole today, was owned by Tony Butera of the Letterman.
Butala,
actually, yeah. Once Brian started hitting with that stuff, he claimed copyright infringement from Last Drag, and so kind of ended Roger's career writing lyrics for Beach Boys.
His collaborators, I find the whole thing very interesting because I feel like Brian, it helps for him to have these collaborators, but what they really are is they're coming to the table with details that allows him to plug into whether it's a subculture or what have you, but it's really just swapping out details. Whether it's Jimmy Bowles, who is asking for surfing hotspots for Surfing USA, or whether it's Roger Christian with his car poems.
Or Van Dyke Parks.
Right. Or even Dennis. I know Dennis on Surfing, he did contribute to those lyrics. It's about Dennis. At least initially, Dennis was a collaborator. You guys want to drop the needle on this bad boy?
Sure.
All right. Lenny, take it away, man. Little Deuce Coupe, track 1, side 1.
Well, Little Deuce Coupe, 1932 Ford that Roger Christian drove out to California to buy because he was obsessed with it. He learned about it from a Motor Trend magazine, actually. And he didn't have a license, and he drove it all the way home. And when it blew up, he customized it with a V12 engine from a 41 Lincoln. So that mother must have been fast. But Again, you're revitalizing a 1930s car for, say, the end of the somewhere in the 1950s. And what happened with custom car culture is that when they got to the 50s or even the late 40s, when cars were really muscular and really great body, made out of the heaviest of metal. That's when car culture in California really, really took off and developed a whole, thing, metal flake, beautiful sculpting, putting those Continental kits on the back. It was a beautiful thing. And I got to say that little 32 Ford, that was the start of it all.
And it's interesting, this song, we're talking about the lyrics, and there's very specific meaning to them. As a kid, I had no idea. Did you, Lenny, at that age, did you know what these terms meant?
Well, again, I was kind of reading custom car magazines. I mean, I had a pile of them. They were like little digest size ones. I just recently got rid of my collection because I thought I am never going to sculpt my taillights like they suggest in there.
The beginning of this song is Brian was looking for potential song lyrics, looking through Roger's, I don't know if it was all car poems, but certainly a ton of car poems in his notebook, and found Shutdown. But while he was looking through there and found Shutdown, he came across the poem for Little Deuce Coupe, and then Mike came to him later on and said it would be great to do a song about Deuce Coupes. And Brian said, "Hey, I know just the thing." And Brian,
didn't Mike have a Deuce Coupe? I believe.
I'm not sure.
I think I read that, yes.
It was Brian who pitched in the lyric, "And one more thing, I got the pink slip daddy." And, I just want to say musically that I know it's Denny all over this record, but Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe that drum roll that kicks in.
No, it's Dennis, and this has been confirmed by David Marks and a few other people. A lot of people think that it's Hal Blaine on drums, but it doesn't really sound like Hal, number one. There's a very identifiable sound to his drum set when he plays on a record and the way he hits the drums.
With this song specifically, he is responsible for the swagger that I feel from this. Yeah. There's a lot of acts that would perform this song would be tripping over themselves, trying to inorganically juice this with some kind of propulsion. But there is a laying back in the pocket sort of swagger inflected shuffle that really, to me, is the key element here. And in addition to some of the best Mike Love bass singing, the whole "You Don't Know What I Got" is some of the best bass singing work that he ever does on a Beach Boys record, I think.
The lyrics, too, I didn't know what they meant at all, but they were so evocative, even to my 6-7-year-old ears. And I wanted into that culture. I never really did get into the whole car thing, but I admired it from afar. And the other thing I'll say about those lyrics, you could write poetry, but it doesn't always sing well. Those lyrics really roll trippingly off the tongue. They really work. That's so important, too. And I think a big part of why Roger's lyrics succeeded in the Beach Boys blender, it's really clicked.
He was a strange guy. Hearing his story, there's a little bit of tragedy to it because he was prone to depression. He was definitely beset with demons. And he was also not unfamiliar with music, at being a disc jockey, having recorded this Last Drag song, and being in Southern California, which was certainly a music industry capital. He was very much aware of music and getting it out to the people. But he had to be really just so chuffed. There's a couple introduction stories that I've read. One, Murray Wilson heard him on KFWB and noted his car interest, and I kind of brought him to Brian. And another one, he and Brian bonded over ice cream sundaes on the Sunset Strip. I think when they met, he had a 55 Corvette, which I found quite attractive, even though I'm partial to 56 to 62 myself.
As a sidebar to what Lenny said, it's interesting to remember that Brian and Mike did a lot of their teenage singing together, purportedly in one of their cars by the glow of the dial. They'd sing Everly Brothers songs and doo-wop songs together. And also another factoid about Roger Christian, I believe he is one of the voices on the Beatles Story album.
Oh, yeah, he put that one together, I believe.
Oh, he produced it, and he's one of the talking heads.
Had a million seller.
So track number 2, Ballad of Old Betsy, which is seemingly based on the structural model of The Surfer Moon, another great song in the recent past from the Beach Boys. This one has always been far and away my favorite song on the record, and one of my 5 or 10 big, major deep cuts for me. There's so much about this song that I love in a way that I can never get over, especially when I think about this song, that spliced in end round that you hear, and you really do hear that splice. Yeah. And even the way that Brian's voice, it comes in imperfectly on the double tracking, everything about it feels perfect in a way that they couldn't have even tried. It's just the way that it came together just happened to be perfect. And the yearning backgrounds, it's just an all-around heartbreaker. Also, Betsy took some beatings, but she never once complained. You know, the double entendre of the lyrics for the time period, you know, I know this is obviously about a car, but, you know, the blurred imagery of a fucked up relationship was so beyond its time in 1963 that I honestly don't know how they were able to get away with this. I don't know how this, for example, passed muster, but All Dressed Up for School somehow, ooh, what a turn on, was way too risque. To me, this is way more risque than All Dressed Up for School or Gonna Hustle You or something like that. I never understood how they got away with it. And for something that is so like, what the fuck did he just say? It's also unbearably moving to me.
Mike Love once told me he thought that might have been a reference to Murray and Audrey.
Wow. Okay.
And to your question, I think in 1963, it was easy enough to pass it off as you're just talking about a car. As far as the censors or whoever was at the helm, be it Capitol or Murray or...
This one just feels so obvious to me. It just feels so obvious that there's a massive double entendre at play.
Well, yeah, but put yourself in 1963, you know. Beatles, 1967, I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. That was 67.
Yeah, but that was 67. Yeah, 67.
How about Elvis? If I Catch You with Another Man, or what is that song?
Yeah, Baby, Let's Play House. Yeah.
The double entendre of car and girl would get such a ridiculous amount of mileage. And I think of Long May You Run, which of course has the Beach Boys reference in it, but so many great car/girl songs. But, you know, this has to be my favorite of all of them.
It's a beautiful song. You know that the Beach Boys in this century have performed that song live. It was in their set. I've seen them do it a few times. Mike, I think, really had a thing for this tune. It's a sleeper. You know, I don't know why this song doesn't get a lot more attention. It's just heavenly. It's just so beautiful.
It's one of my 30 favorite Beach Boys songs. See, Lenny's like, nah, be a rock critic for 3 years and see if you come out of it giving those kinds of...
I like the fact that you have 30 favorite Beach Boys songs, and that's culling it quite a bit, I have to say. Yeah. I mean, everything they touch, because it's the Beach Boys, you know, they make even the most trite things. I think about this with the Beatles, too. I mean, love me do, you know what I'm going to do, you know, please love me do. It's like, it's so simplistic. It could be dumb. But it's not, because it sounds like the Beach Boys. I mean, so many songs on this album are like elevated because of those harmonies, because of the arrangements, because of the strange modulation that, you know, slides through. They transcend their sense of song with the sense of the Beach Boys as artists.
And attitude and swagger, too, that really plays into it, I think.
I mean, when I actually found out that the lyrics of Don't Worry Baby was when I bragged about my car or something, I thought, what? A completely beautiful love song. And, you know, it's kind of a pedestrian way to begin it. I just thought, man, this is marvelous. Marvelous.
Yeah.
All right, track 3, Be True to Your School.
Very interesting. Interesting to hear the early version. I miss the Honeys doing, doing the high school cheer. It's actually a very intriguing way of seeing how a song, which seems fine. I mean, the original seems like, oh yeah, put that out. But how it evolves and becomes so much of a greater song. And of course, you're talking about high school. Isn't the University of Wisconsin marching theme in there somewhere?
Mm-hmm.
But, this is an adolescent song about be true to your school. And it actually reminds me of my favorite high school song, which is the 28 versions of High School USA by Tommy Facenda, of which I own about 13, especially the New Brunswick one, the New Jersey one, which mentions my alma mater, New Brunswick High School.
Dave, I don't know if you know that record, but it was, I guess, early 60s and early 50s. And they actually recorded, how many versions did you say, Lenny?
There's 28 versions of it.
They released 28 versions, I guess simultaneously, where they recorded custom editions to address all those.
It was very regional. There was a New Brunswick one, a New Jersey one. There was, I'm from New Brunswick. That's why I keep flipping.
I'm from Livingston, by the way.
We're close. But, it would be Summit, Nutley, Jefferson, Macquarie, Cayenne, Union, New Brunswick, and Carteret too. Gonna do the high school bop with you. But they had 20, an LA one.
It's got to be the only record of its kind, I'm guessing.
I guess they had the superstructure, and then they just had Tommy Facenda sing these school names over and over and over and over and over and over again. He must have finished that session and, oh my God.
I got to throw my hat in the ring here and just say that I have never liked Be True to Your School. The 2 versions of the song, the album version and then the single version, which has the cheerleader yells by the Honeys and on Wisconsin, like you said, Lenny, I do like the single version because I feel like, there's corny and then there's a level of corniness that I feel, this is a song that wound up kind of working against the Beach Boys long term, where anyone that denigrated the white bread, squeaky clean image, they're talking about this song. They're talking about this and a small handful of other songs. And it's just so beyond square that I can't really wrap my head and my heart around this one. But the singles got those crazy choice production touches, and all the problems that I have with the song are completely wiped away by the wildly overstuffed production touches on that 45, which creates this crazy tableau of early 60s high school universe. And it reminds me of Help Me Rhonda. I mean, Brian knew that he swung and he missed. And so he went back. Things were going too quickly for him to get it right the first time around. So, I don't like the Help Me Rhonda, the initial version of that, but I love the single. And this is one of those that it's a skipper for me.
He's obviously growing at an incredibly rapid rate as an artist, as a person who understands what the studio can do. But here's an example of a first draft, which is functional. It's not bad. Again, if it wouldn't have been revised, it would be one of those cuts on Little Deuce Coupe that we could discuss over several drinks, 3 a.m. But to see how he evolves this, that to me is what's fascinating. It's like listening to Bob Dylan hone like a Rolling Stone over all those takes. I'm very interested because we've all been in the studio and seen how songs progress. I like to see what process. To me, all these Beatles reissues with every, grunt they've ever done in the studio, they're not going to top what they did. But to see the artistic mind, that to me as an artist is fascinating. On my solo record that I'm working on, I wanted to use a track that Patti and I worked on for the Bangor record called Solstice. On one of the hard drives, I found my kind of demo of it. And I didn't have our real one. So I thought, this is a pretty good thing, but it doesn't have Patti's, it was kind of confusing. And then I found a burned CD of the track that we made in the studio, not complete, but pretty good. And all of a sudden, there's a bridge in there that I didn't even remember, doing. So it's like to see the mind of an artist, especially Brian Wilson, and where he took this innocuous song about, rooting for your favorite team, just like you root for your girl, and then making it the thing, that to me is a real window into his creativity and how he was expanding at such a rapid rate.
Was it only Be True to Your School and Help Me Rhonda where he had first draft songs that he later revisited? Or was there anything else that I'm not thinking of right now?
Well, there's things on Smile.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There might be some others, but those come to mind.
I never felt this way about my school. I never came close to thinking or feeling this way about my school. Did you guys have this kind of loyalty and, fierce kinds of emotional fervor towards your high school?
Sometimes. I mean, you go to the local football game, you'd root for the New Brunswick Zebras, whop the hell out of South River. You'd wear a jacket with, the imprint on it. I didn't participate in sports, so I never got the coveted letter, which would entrance me into the world of cheerleaders pawing at me as I came off the field with a touchdown. But I don't know. I mean, it's elite. I mean, you can see it now. America's sports crazy, insane. I mean, my daughter lives in Oxford, Mississippi. And Ole Miss is like totally be true to your school. They just love their team. Sometimes I don't understand it. Sometimes it's fun to root for something. Sometimes it's a metaphor for our sense of competition as human beings. I don't know. I mean, but there is a sense of allegiance, just like in cars. I mean, I was a Chevy person forever. And now I have a 1961 Ford Thunderbird. So I'm kind of a Ford guy now, which amazes me because I went over to the dark side.
It's funny. I never put it together, but the only song to me that I don't quite dig on this record is the only one that violates the concept.
This is one of those songs that when I hear the downbeat of it on the radio or on the album, I'm thinking, do I want to skip this song? But once you roll with it, it's got some turns in it that really get to me. There's some badass elements to the melody that really make it not corny and not square. It's actually pretty badass. That's my take on it.
Moving on, track 4, Car Crazy Cutie, a run, a do-run.
Well, he loved Phil Spector. What could I say? And I'm sure this postdates the do-run, which, of course, was a placeholder. They didn't have a lyric when they wrote the song, so they just wrote, the do-run. And then they kind of liked it. So we love onomatopoeia, as they say.
As they did a few times, this was their nod to Dion. I think this has a real Dion kind of sensibility to it and swagger to it and feel. Perhaps The Wanderer informed this one. Dion was perhaps the first rock and roll scatter, right? Did anybody scat before Dion? Maybe there were, but he did it quite a few times on his records. And that type of vocal style, I think on this record, I think it was a nod to Dion. And wait, is this one of those songs that had another life?
Yes. In fact, this song has an extensive life. Brian got a lot of mileage out of this one. It started out as a song called Pamela Jean.
Right.
Later that year, when he was working with Bob Norberg in The Survivors, Brian recorded the original version of Pamela Jean. It was released as a single. It never charted. And then after that, it metamorphosized again and became the title track to Muscle Beach Party. It's had 3 iterations.
Amazing.
When we talk about multiple drafts, in the Beach Boys, more than any other group I'm aware of, the iterations through which a song will have a life, you can actually see like a strand of DNA. A song will motif its way through the band's entire career and blossom in so many different ways. All Dressed Up for School is like the ultimate example of that. It explodes itself into every decade. I mean, it's in the 60s, it's in the 70s, it is in the 80s even. It's in Going On, which I believe is 1980. To watch that happen is really a specific to the Beach Boys, because I can't think of any other group that does that.
Not offhand, but that would be a good study, This is another one that is noteworthy because you really hear, and there's a few songs on this album where you really hear Denny's vocal cutting through the blend, like on that bridge section or solo section where they're just repeating the title line. Denny is in the forefront, and it's very noticeable. And I just love that when his voice has cut through the years on a number of tracks. And I think this is a good early example of that.
It definitely sticks out of the mix more so than any of the other guys. And it's always a pleasant experience to be able to notice it.
Yeah.
My favorite element of this is Brian's falsetto on the tag is just top notch. It's so great.
You're right. Brian's vocal on this is crazy good. And that reminds me of something I wanted to say during Ballad of Old Betsy. If you listen to it, that's the one song on this album where it sounds to me like Brian has like a stuffed up nose or a head cold. Seriously, if you listen to Ballad Old Betsy, I've never heard the timbre of his voice on any other Beach Boys record like it was on Ballad of Old Betsy.
All right, track number 5, Cherry Cherry Coupe, which was, speaking of motifs and reiterations, it was their 1962 outtake Land Ahoy, reworked and revamped with new lyrics.
It's a very interesting metaphor, though, because cherry means virgin. So when you climb in your cherry coupe, you're going to have some fun in the back seat.
Speaking of, in Pylam, there was a guy named David Hyman, and his brother name was Buster.
Yeah, I know. And then, Stiv Bators, masturbators, adolescent humor, gotta love it.
Cherry Cherry Coupe is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs.
Talk to me.
It's just got a spirit to it, something in the vocals, something in the track. It's so tough. It's just so tough. And I don't have to explain it. It just speaks to me. It's just my thing. I just dig it so much. And there's another thing about this song that me and my friends, door handles are off, but I know we'll never miss them. They open when I want with the celluloid instead of solenoid. He's a celluloid system. Again, Denny is really prominent on the mix on this one.
That stuttering drum thing he does on this, incredible.
That's the other thing about Denny's playing. He had such an attitude to the way he played drums. He was perfect for what they were doing. He was the perfect drummer for the Beach Boys. He had his own style that he just copped so quickly. He assimilated whatever he was listening to into his own thing. He just by sheer will, and necessity. They needed a drummer. He either wanted to be or they deemed him the drummer and knighted him thusly. It's like I guess he did with anything in his life. He went for it. And he did it. But he was the right tool for that job, man. And I love what he brought to those tracks. Swagger and a tough feel, just great.
He's definitely a king on this track. And the other MVP is Mike, because the bass line that he comes up with here is an entirely separate lyric. And so he's just down in the substrata doing and singing his own thing. It's almost like he's decided, I'm going to do a full counterpoint all the way through and wend my way through separately yet together with these guys.
Real doo-wop kind of thing. There's so many doo-wop records where that was going on. Like, Lenny, you probably know Can I Come Over Tonight by the Velours?
Yeah, I do know that.
Yeah, where the guy is just going ape shit on the bass. The guy is just doing this whole thing. Mike knew his doo-wop, and he really had a passion for it, and it's just so important to what made these songs come alive.
I mean, the Beach Boys were a vocal harmony group. Forget the topics, forget the instrumentation. They were out of the vocal harmony world. You knew they knew Rubber Biscuit by the Chips or any of the other, especially Southern California, had quite a doo-wop scene centered around Dutone Records. So I'm sure they were sitting around on their version of what a street corner was, singing them along with this more sophisticated Four Freshmen harmonies. Yeah. But the entry level, the original sin would have been doo-wop. As a matter of fact, that was the first music I understood. I grew up in New York City where you would see groups on the street corners singing, I didn't know, rockabilly or, that my role model was doo-wop groups. And matter of fact, in 62, 63, I had dreams of being a high tenor in a doo-wop group, even though my voice changed rapidly. And then, of course, the folk revival, and I got my acoustic guitar to be a lonely folk singer in the backyard. And then, of course, the Beatles came, and that was the real role model that I could aspire to. But doo-wop, I mean, that was the first records I ever collected. I went to Times Square Records. I was really a very passionate follower of the a cappella thing that happened on the East Coast in the 60s, which was kind of promoted by, quote, oldies stores. So you could really sense that an era was just about to end. But that was my favorite music and still is.
If I had a studio, I would have a burning trash barrel right on the floor there.
One more thing about Cherry Cherry Coupe. There's a very cool piano part going on Cherry Cherry Coupe, which kind of gets buried once the vocals kick in. Piano, of course, was such an integral part to a lot of the early Beach Boys records. Brian really churning on the piano.
Track number 6, 409, which 409 was on the last LP. And really, the funniest thing about this is that we're just months after its first appearance, and it already feels prehistoric in context.
I mean, the growth of Brian at this point is just skyrocketing. It's like he's a 3-stage rocket. He's figured out surfing and surfing safari, and now he's on to the next, and he's on to the next. But I don't know, 409, you'd have to, be into cubic displacement. I always loved that my original Chevy Impala was a 347. I know my 61 Ford is a 390, but 409, that was like you're into getting into muscle cars. I think my Super Sport was a 427, if I'm not mistaken. The bigger the engine, the bigger the bang. It was their start of figuring this duality of surf and cars, still on a B-side, but still, the same song, the same subculture sideways.
And it's true that Brian was growing by leaps and bounds, but the band as a performing unit and as a recording unit were too. 409, that was among their first band recordings after the Candix era anyway. It sounds almost anemic compared to the tracks on even the Surfin' USA album. In short order, you listen to...
But they have the harmony down.
The harmony, yeah. But I'm talking as an instrumental force.
Yeah.
You go from the Surfin' Safari album, on which 409 first appeared, to the second album, Surfin' USA. They're a powerhouse on surfing. But I guess the touring and the confidence that they gained between that release of the first album and they really were gelling, and they were really becoming a great rock and roll band.
Yeah, this feels contextually like an Alan Lomax field recording.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. All right, so that's the end of side 1. When we flip it, track 1 on the second side is again from the last LP, the first track to which Roger Christian wrote lyrics, Shutdown.
Yeah, Last Drag. Brian wanted Hot Rod lyrics. He thought, this is going to be great, and to give it that element of drag race, which again is, you had a lot of songs about it, teen tragedy songs. And, this would also morph into, something like Dead Man's Curve, which I think Roger also had a piece of. You're in the car, you're going too fast. Something's going to happen, but you're going fast. And that is really a great metaphor for the acceleration of what the 60s were promising. Engines are getting bigger. People are starting to really floor it. I believe Ford versus Ferrari is starting about this time where you want to compete with the Euro sports cars. Muscle cars are around the corner. And so, let's just keep on upping the ante. until you get today's hypercars, which go from 0 to who knows what in 2 point some seconds, and you can't drive them on a street because you'll be insane.
I can't say enough about Shutdown. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Beach Boys track, but it's this and Surfing USA really ignited it for me. And Shutdown occupies a very special place in my heart, you know. And again, going back to the story that we were talking about, Last Drag, I don't know if Lenny mentioned, but Tony Butala of the Letterman, who owned the label that first draft of, lyrically anyway, of what became Shutdown, wanted to sue them because when the Shutdown came out, it was credited solely to Brian and not to Roger as co-writer. So I don't know how or if that was ever resolved, but it's an interesting story. I only learned about Last Drag in the last couple of years. It illuminates the whole Christian Wilson dynamic, I think.
All right, track 2 on the second side. You know, talking about great sleepers like Betsy, Spirit of America is not necessarily the first song that comes to mind when I think about Little Deuce Coupe, but it's just one of those that every time it's on, it's, oh yeah, this song is amazing.
Well, I have to say that Spirit of America is, well, I'd say probably in my top 5 of Beach Boys songs. I was introduced to it by Andy Paley, who loved it. We played it incessantly. It really captures, in a way, I mean, first of all, the title and Craig Breedlove's continuing attempt to break the land speed record in a fight that, you know, was so crazy. I mean, you know, they go to the Bonneville Salt Flats. You could be out of control and slide for miles. But it's such a wistful song in a weird way. It really captures, you know, not only cars and aspiration and ambition, but it's also just a beautiful, beautifully sung song. And I have to say, you know, of all the Beach Boys songs, and I'm really a fan of, like, All Summer Long is probably my pre-Good Vibrations favorite album because I love Wendy. But Spirit of America is just transcendent to me. It moves me totally. It made me find out who Craig Breedlove was and that there's an element of the frontier. And that to me is part of Brian's thing. I mean, he would really explore it with Van Dyke Parks. You know, the manifest destiny of the West and the sense of anything's possible. And to see Craig Breedlove going like a bat out of hell across the Bonneville flood, but it's like angelic. I can go on and on and on, but it is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs.
I would imagine that it really was something that stuck with the guys because after Endless Summer made these guys nostalgic mainstays in 74, the follow-up compilation in 75 was named after it. And I remember before really connecting with the song, because I always liked it, but I had a moment that was almost psychedelically vivid. It was about 2005. And I was driving in a bus in Israel, like out in the desert. And I was in a bus driven by this woman who was a real Neil Cassidy type, specifically in the way that she's driving this bus, but she's looking everywhere except the road. But I had full trust in how she was driving. She was just keyed in that Cassidy-like way that I would imagine him being. And this song was blasting. I still, to this day, can't hear the song without thinking of that moment, especially being in another country and just having this blissed out experience, hearing this in a completely decontextualized kind of way. And you say it's sort of wistful, but to me, this is full on wistful, full on 100% yearning. You know, his vocal kills me. It's one of Brian's early highlights to me.
There's a lot of soul to this track in the vocals, the feel of it. I agree. It's majestic, it's beautiful and soulful. A couple other things about this tune, I think, is maybe the first example of hearing Al's voice pop out in the blend on the chorus. I'm pretty sure that's Al that's prominent on the chorus. And it's a texture that had yet to be heard until this point. So that always struck me too. And to Lenny's point about the yearning and kind of the forward-looking sensibility of Brian's vocal, there was a bit of that going on in the early 60s. I always thought it would tie into I think you mentioned the New Frontier and maybe Camelot and the hope for the future. I think you hear it in Telstar and even that soaring vocal in Sherry by the Four Seasons. There was this kind of lurching and yearning that was imbued in some of these compositions. I think this is an example of that. Would you agree, Lenny? There's other examples I'm forgetting, but there was a sensibility.
We're talking about the early 60s, which was a time we're coming out of the midpoint of the American century. We're coming into the 60s where suddenly there was a sense of possibility, truncated by the assassination of Kennedy. But you're coming into a decade where, we're all looking to the stars, the early space thing. By the end of the decade, we'd be on the moon, which is pretty remarkable, especially given the computing power that they had then as opposed to now. There was a real sense of openness, possibility, opening into the incredible cornucopia of what the 60s would offer in the midst of incredible violence, the war in Vietnam, the struggle of the civil rights thing. It was a very tumultuous decade, but you could feel the sense of hope and aspiration. And I think that's what was caught in Spirit of America, so well named. It really became not about some crazy guy trying to break the land speed record, but about the American spirit trying to become all it wanted to be. I just think it's a marvelous achievement. Of all the songs on this record, this is the one that moves me the most.
Wow, that's some beautiful stuff, guys.
I guess every generation has their sense of when it was then, it was the greatest time ever. But certainly in terms of rock and roll, I got to say it's probably true. Maybe the music will be much different as it is in the 21st century. But that sense of hope, that's really what Nuggets is about. I'm a kind of weird mutant New Jersey teenager, really interested in science fiction and geeking out on this or that or the other thing. And I found a possibility in picking up an electric guitar and plugging it in. I wasn't a sports guy. I wasn't even that good at school. But all of a sudden, I understood who I could be, that sense of elevation and possibility. And the music kind of encouraged that. And, the artists that we have, which we're still listening to. It's remarkable who sound strange. Jimi Hendrix sounds stranger now than he did in 1967. The Beatles, certainly, you can go through it. It was a very innovative and empowering time to be alive and attuned to the culture. Whether that is a virtue of my particular generation or whether this particular generation who's making their mark now will have that same effect, I don't know.
Track 3 on side 2, Our Car Club, on the last LP, but obviously belonging here too.
What is more of a club than a band? Come on, you're in the Smithereens Club. I'm in the Patti Smith Group Club. It's nice because it's a family. It's people you go and hang out with and talk the lingo, whether it's car lingo or whether it's like band lingo. It's a way of belonging to a family in a world where families are sometimes dispersed.
This could be my favorite holdover from a prior LP. I love, this obviously fits like a glove on this record. 409 and Shutdown in a lot of ways are kind of squeezed dry for me. And I love hearing Our Car Club over and over. I could hear it anytime and it sounds fresh to me.
And this is the only non-band track. This is the Wrecking Crew on Our Car Club. Huh. Yeah, and that's Hal Blaine on drums, and it's a good example of when he would use timbales and he would tune them down instead of tom-toms to achieve the sound you hear. I'm pretty sure. I think one is a tom-tom and the lower one is a timbale. I don't know if we talked about this on the other interview or you've discussed this with anybody else, but this track was intended for the Honeys initially, for a song called Rabbit's Foot, which I guess was never completed. I don't know if I've ever heard that rendition of it, but Brian retooled the track as Our Car Club for the Surfer Girl album. So it was, I guess, not intended to be a Beach Boys song, and that's why they didn't play on it. I believe that was the thinking here. I know David Marks plays on it. He told me that. And maybe Carl. Again, it's a badass riff, man. It's a tough groove on this. And I think that's another element to these early tracks that make them last so long. There's something going on here.
The next track, track 4, No Go Showboat, genius. The vocal modulations, every time I hear it, I feel like I'm constantly guessing.
I love the no-go show. I mean, the rhyme scheme is kind of great. You know, great song. One of Andy Paley's favorites, by the way. And it's a good example of how they kind of raise up lyrics that could be pretty weirdly pedestrian and make it a really intriguing song. But there's a couple chord changes in there that take you by surprise.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that Andy liked this song. I think the first moment that I met Andy, I met him in 1987 at the Columbia Hotel in London. There was a piano there, and we just bonded on Beach Boys right away. And this is one of the songs that we were singing together at the piano.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I love I'm even shut down by the ice cream truck. Great lyric. It's got so much going for it. The modulations, the key changes, and the tag. Again, another great Brian tag.
The tag is nuts because you could tell so much work and thought went into orchestrating that key change on the tag. And then as soon as it hits, it fades down almost right away. Instead of being milked unnecessarily like most key changes, he just gets there and then yanks us out of the experience. This is definitely one of my favorite songs on the record. And track 5 on the second side, Lenny, like you said, straight from the Four Freshmen songbook, A Young Man Is Gone, which is basically just James Dean car wreck rework of Their Hearts Are Full of Spring.
My question is whether these vocals were double tracked or not. They sound so lush. And I was listening to it and thinking, they are lush, beautifully recorded. I'm sure, they use the classic microphone, but did they double these vocals? That's my question.
I think they are. What Brian started doing, I don't know if he did it on the Surfing USA album or started on the Surfer Girl record. The tracks were mixed in mono, but they would cut 2 tracks of vocals. They were double track. And for the stereo issues, they would split the vocal takes, which created a beautiful shimmering sound. Yeah, for sure. This is double tracked. It's very rich and lush.
But perfectly double tracked. You can't hear any separation or anything. Not an easy thing to do.
And it is a complete rewrite of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring. At least when I looked it up, I don't know if Bobby Troop, who wrote that song, gets the sole writing credit on this or not, or if they have a split.
I believe he does.
That's weird because it's not his lyrics.
Right.
But that song looms so large in the Beach Boys history, and it was one of the tunes that unlocked Brian's alchemy. It's the kernel of the sound that Brian appropriated for the group. It really is. And it's got some changes in it, especially in that last verse that are just heavenly. That always push a button in my soul when I hear it. For those who have not heard the Four Freshmen version, I would urge you to listen to it. It's really one of my favorite recordings. I think it's from '59. It's really worth hearing where Brian got it from. It's a very different feel. It's a bit more laid back, but it's certainly one of the most important recordings in my life, the Freshmen's version of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring. It's great that they were able to put it in this vein.
I also have to say, this is a particularly imaginative way for Brian to squeeze more material when he was really in a pinch, just to rewrite these lyrics. And I never tire of hearing this twist on Their Hearts. It's really great.
An incredible, incredible harmony. And kind of so unadorned, it does show what the group was in their most heartful incarnation.
Mm. And then the final song on the record, Step on the Gas.
Wow.
That song, Custom Machine.
Well, that was what you did. You bought your car and then you customized it, especially if you were mechanically inclined or took that automotive shop class. And you could get under the hood. You could adjust the idle on your carburetor. You could, swap out things. You could make your car look more futuristic than a futuristic Plymouth Fury, for instance, or whatever your favorite car is from the great Populux era. For me, it was always the '59 Impala with the wings in the back and the cat's eye taillights. That to me is the height of beauty. Custom machines, it was a beautiful example of American avant-garde sensibility, now sadly lost.
I want to also notate that along with No Go Showboat, this to me, I always linked these two because it's so inventive. There's an incredibly groovy Brian Wilson piano solo tossed in just to put it over the top. But this is only 98 seconds long. And again, with all the modulations and the changes, this on the outro almost feels like a boast to me.
The song is 98 seconds?
98 seconds long.
Holy moly.
I know.
That's insane.
Nuts, right?
Is that really 98? Really?
Yeah.
Jeez.
I know. This has always been one of my favorite songs on the record. I love how it goes out on this one.
Yeah.
Like, Mike's Step on the Gas line, that sticks in the craw like nothing else on this entire record. I feel like this could have been a hit if they milked it just a little bit more, maybe added one more section to it or something. But this one always has me arching my brow. Every time I hear it, fully engaged. It has my complete attention.
I agree. It's just another shining example of how great this album is and how undeservedly overlooked it is. You don't really hear a lot of talk about the Little Deuce Coupe album, but it's just chock full of great stuff.
Here's my little capsule review. This is a total mindfuck to me because Little Deuce Coupe is both a patchwork quilt rust job that was cobbled together at breakneck speed and at the same time a groundbreaking masterpiece too. That dichotomy to me is endlessly staggering. Plus, I'm not a car guy, yet just like the Beach Boys aren't beach guys, it doesn't at all make a difference, even with those intensively detail-oriented, automotive-leaning lyrics. The deep cuts are outstanding, the conceptual thread ties it together beautifully, and the repurposed tracks that are poached feel perfectly at home after having been shuffled into an entirely new deck. I just see the old songs as flash-forward artistic statements. All of them belonged on here, and intention-wise, this was no venal cash grab. I'll give this 5 stars out of 5.
I wish I still had a CD player in my car because I would like to hear this one cruising down the avenue. Gotta say, being a car guy and loving the classic era of the internal combustion engine, I just enjoy listening to this. It really is evocative. And it's not just car songs. I mean, it's not like the Ripcords or any of those bands. It's got those Brian Wilson and Beach Boys harmonies. It's got a sense of expansiveness, and it's one of my favorite Beach Boy records.
I'm right there, man.
How many stars do you give it out of 5?
I hate giving stars.
I know you do.
Everybody's, hey, I give it 5.5. You know why? Because I like it. It's a great record, but if I like it, I'm going to give it that extra half a star.
You've earned the right.
I'll give a 5.5 too. There.
All right. Yeah.
God damn it, I've underrated it.
Well, I'm going to come down to New Jersey, Dennis, when the spring comes, so the road salt is gone. I'm going to take you for a ride in my 61 T-Bird because it is a boat.
I would really, really dig that.
A few other things as far as the history. 11 days after this record came out, Brian tracks Little Saint Nick and Drive In. And on October 28th, the Be True to Your School, backed with In My Room singles released in the U.S. I definitely give that single 5 very hard stars. Be True to Your School makes it to number 6. In My Room hits number 23. And in my head, I'm always replacing the version of Be True to Your School on that record with the single. And November 63, the Beach Boys signed a new long-term 6-year recording contract with Capitol. Also, Jan and Dean's Drag City is released, featuring Brian on vocals as well. That peaks at number 10. November 7th, I Do is completed. It's left unreleased, even though Brian gives it to the Castells, who release it as a Brian Wilson-produced single. On November 20th, the Beach Boys record the second and final version of Little Saint Nick and the Lord's Prayer, which to me is indicative of how intensely in the pocket their harmony singing was becoming, as well as an indicator of their burgeoning spirituality, which really would hit a peak on Smile. And we have a special guest appearance from Bill Medley, telling us an incredible story about the very first time he heard the Lord's Prayer and how that completely changed his viewpoint on the Beach Boys from a pop bubblegum act to an act that was capable of just laying him out, and the very odd place where he first heard it.
Brian and I were friends ever since we did Shindig. They did Shindig, and I didn't realize he was a huge Righteous Brother fan and a big Bill Medley fan. And I wasn't necessarily a big Beach Boy fan because at that point they were really doing, Surf City here, it was pretty much bubblegum, cute. And when we were on Shindig, Brian, I'll never forget it, he came and got me. I was on set, and he came and got me and said, Bill, I want to play something for you. I want you to hear something. And I said, oh, geez. I said, well, okay. And at the ABC studios, they had a huge bathroom and they had a piano in it, which you got that great reverb,
Yeah.
And I walked in, I sat down, I said, okay, let's hear what you got. And they did a version of the Lord's Prayer that just absolutely killed me. I mean, we went from, this teeny bop surf music to this Four Freshmen, the Lord's Prayer. And I said, my God. I ran to our dressing room and I got Bobby. I said, Bobby, you got to come and hear this Beach Boy thing. He said, come on, man. I could care less. I said, I'm not even going to tell you anything about it. You got to trust me. So I drug him to the bathroom to hear the guys sing the song. And it just killed him because he was a huge Four Freshmen fan. And so was Brian. And from that point on, I just loved the Beach Boys, and Carl and Brian. They just killed me. Those beautiful high tenor voices and how Brian, wrote around those voices. And they just made great records. And Brian and I just became real close friends.
You started spending time with him in the 60s?
Well, we were recording in the same studio. I think it was United or Western, and he was in the smaller studio and I was in the bigger studio because I was doing orchestra stuff. And Brian would once in a while come in to my studio and say, Bill, can I borrow you for a minute? I need you to, I'm a little stumped on something I'm doing. So I would go into his studio and listen to what he was doing and give my advice, like Brian needed my advice. And I would get stumped and I would go in to Brian's studio and bring him into my studio and say, what do you think I should do right here? And so we became real close. And I'm just so thankful that I got to become good friends and know Brian real well before he kind of went off the rails, because he was just a brilliant guy.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall. November 22nd, JFK is assassinated, and the Beach Boys play a show at Marysville, California. Fred Vale presents the band with a shopping bag full of about $6,000 in cash. And then really late, as he and Murray are counting it, about 2 a.m., Mike and Brian are at the adjacent bed working on The Warmth of the Sun as they're counting ones and fives. December 9th, Little Saint Nick, Back with the Lord's Prayer, is released as a single. Little Saint Nick peaks at number 3 in the Billboard Christmas chart, and more importantly, becomes a Christmas perennial. The Lord's Prayer, what can you say, is just one of the most moving and adept uses of harmony I've ever heard in my life. And 5 stars, again, much to Lenny's chagrin. I'm going to go just with 5. December 13th, Brian records Sharon Marie's Story of My Life and Think About You Baby, the latter of which eventually becomes Darlin', and the latter was also done by Spring in the early 70s. December 21st, 1963, the show in Sacramento, from half of which the Beach Boys concert was recorded, goes down, and then a session is booked for January 1st, 1964, as the boys slide most cockily into the new year. They were the top band in the country. They'd released 4 singles in 63. All of those singles hit the top 10. Their Christmas single, Little Saint Nick, reached number 3. They were on top of the world. There couldn't possibly be another band that would come down the pike to knock them off their perch.
Oh, yeah.
So, Lenny, just a few questions that I ask all the guests.
right?
Lenny, is this your favorite Beach Boys album?
No, I'm not big on favorites, to be perfectly honest, because each of their eras are so interesting. I mean, how could you say that this is more favorite than Pet Sounds? I have a personal affection for All Summer Long. You know, the truncated smile, I appreciate that ambition, and I've heard several versions of how it might have been put together. I just appreciate their art and their evolution. A lot of bands, you can't talk about this evolution. They have the sound. Phil Spector, the sound. You know, there's not a lot of evolution happening. But for the Beach Boys, you know, Rolling Stones, another group that like continually evolves and changes. And I have my favorite moments in there, but that doesn't mean that it's the best or anything like that. But with the Beach Boys, I have a lot of affection for this because I love to put my pedal to the metal and feel the, but I appreciate the arc of their narrative. That to me is very, very important. You know, it's right up there in my pantheon.
How about you, Dennis? Is this your favorite Beach Boys album?
No, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I love it to pieces, you know, and it has some of my favorite Beach Boys moments on it, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite.
Okay, gentlemen, what is the last great Beach Boys album? Lenny, I know you're going to smack the shit out of me after all these questions.
The last great Beach Boys album, I like Holland. I would say that's probably when I started moving out, but I think Holland has a real vibe, a real sense of itself, and obviously the group is putting pieces together after Brian's Flame Out. The Heroes and Villains album, Vegetable, you know, one with Vegetable, I find that really intriguing, but, you know, it's kind of like cleaning up after a cataclysmic event that didn't happen. So
You're talking about Smiley Smile?
Smiley Smile, yeah. It's very listenable, but there's something about Holland that really touches me. I guess the group finding its footing, and then after that, they kind of become their own self-fulfilling prophecy of being a pop band.
How about you, Dennis? What's the last great Beach Boys album?
I guess I'd have to say Love You. I think, you know, without looking at a list, it's the last album where it really feels like the essence of the group is in full force. They're all singing on it, and Brian wrote some great songs. It has the spirit of the band. I feel the spirit of what I love about the group is still very tangible and inherent in that album, and it's a lot of fun. I think that's the other thing that perhaps we could have said about this and any Beach Boys album that we love. There's a sense of fun to it, high spirit to it that never gets old.
Okay, last question. Do the Beach Boys slip into irrelevancy for you, Lenny? And if so, then at which LP?
Well, when you're talking about a group that's been going for over 60 years, there comes a time when you've heard every permutation of them. I mean, I feel that about the Rolling Stones. No matter what they do, I've heard it. I've understood it, and I don't have to listen to them again except to say, oh, Hackney Diamonds, that's, I don't know, you know, what can you say? It's the Rolling Stones. I will always go back to the classic Beach Boys myself. You know, to me, Pet Sounds, to hear God Only Knows is just a great moment in time. I don't think you can ask for anything more. Sometimes groups just become themselves. I know with Patti, we don't really have a desire to do another record. We feel like our dozen records have told our tale. They're all have things of movement and interest to it. Our last record, Banga, especially with the cut Constantine's Dream that me and Patti dreamed up, is a beautiful bookend to the adventurism of Horses. You know, there's a lot of records in this world, and I think that you have to understand that perhaps you just don't need to keep on keeping on. I heard Neil Young's most recent single, and I thought, yeah, I've heard this before. You know, I would much rather hear something that I've never encountered. It might be 50 or 60 years old. It might be 45. I find in the back of Revilla Grooves in Milltown that I've never heard of the artist, but entrances me. So, you know, I have to say that for me, the Beach Boys are in my wall of fame. And when I take them out, I will listen to the ones that particularly turn me on.
So is there an LP then where they become irrelevant, do you think?
Probably, but since I don't own it, I don't know. Like, when you stop, I mean, Beach Boys Love You, I think, it's okay. Yeah, I like it, but am I going to put on Kokomo? I don't think so.
You don't like the Still Cruisin' record?
Not really. Yeah. I mean, I kind of got it. They're suffused with nostalgia. And I got to see that one of their last Brian performances in some Scandinavian country. We happened to be in the same town and we were invited there and got to shake hands with Brian vaguely backstage. It was great to see. But to me, it's like you're seeing them then. You're not seeing a group in the full movement forward. And I'm all about forward movement. Again, once you start like being yourself sideways, no matter how, unless you are struck by lightning, you're not going to top who you were, and a lot of times I listen to the radio and whatever new group is happening, and but if I know that the Libertines sound like Johnny Thunders, I'm going to devalue the Libertines in my own thing because I know where they came from. I know where they came from is more interesting, at least to me, who lived through that. If I'm a kid, if I'm my grandson listening to Imagine Dragons, he don't know about that stuff, so he's getting it firsthand.
Right.
Maybe he'll listen to Imagine Dragons in the year 2065. Not sure about that, but I don't know. Like I said, sometimes when you drop off getting the new album by somebody, it means you've kind of figured them out. I have a very thick Beach Boys section. And if I want to hear the Beach Boys, I can go there.
How about you, Dennis? Did they slip into irrelevancy for you? And if so, where?
Well, I would kind of default to MIU, I guess. There's a couple cuts I really like on there, but I think they kind of lost their way on that record. It's a tough question to answer. There's good tracks on all of their albums. So personally, they were always relevant to me.
Gentlemen, I am seriously beside myself to be with two hugely talented gentlemen, both of whose music I grew up on. I mean, Lenny, the first line of the debut record of the Patti Smith Group is the best first line of any first album in music history, and you never drop the chalice. I am really honored to be talking with you guys about this record that was like peeled off so quickly, almost as an afterthought, and was given so much attention today. Probably more attention than they gave the actual record.
Well, it's real garage rock if you're talking about it, because you're wrenching that, I always think garage rock, you're going in there, you're tuning up, you're turning on, so there's not a lot of difference between the internal combustion engine and the internal combustion engine of a rock and roll band.
That's cool.
What do you like better, Cars or the Beach Boys?
That's apples and oranges, please. I wouldn't compare the two myself. What do you like better? Fenders or Gibsons? They're equally wonderful.
And I have one last question for you, Lenny, and that's the whole time here, especially talking about qualifying things and rating and ranking. I'm just having this unignorable feeling that at some point you had an experience as a rock writer that really shook you to your foundations, whether you wrote a bad review and then bumped into that artist at a bar and then it just was a wake-up experience. There was an experience that you had, wasn't there?
Well, I don't think negatively, so I'm not likely to run into an artist who I've given a quasi-thoughtful review to, or we'll talk about it. But I just like the positive energy. I mean, here I am, a rock writer, writing for jazz and pop, covering the MC5 Velvet's Stooges beat. And then I get to meet Lou Reed upstairs at Max's during the final hurrah of the Velvet Underground. And, he's pretty wary of everyone, but we're talking about horror comics, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, EC Comics, and doo-wop. And then I got to be friendly with him in a way that was beyond what I wrote. He knew I was sympathetic in the same way with the Stooges, the MC5, my triumvirate of influential bands. And, so I guess my writing brought that to me. And then I, of course, came who I never dreamed I would be, which is a rock musician in a band that has a half century of lifeline, which is kind of remarkable. I always look at the blessings and the honorifics I've gotten in bending my knee to the music. I mean, I've never thought that I'm more important than what I'm hearing. I have no desire to be a, quote, rock star. I don't have that Lamborghini, by God. And I don't have a bunch of bangles, but I do love to play music, especially with the unlikely long life of Nuggets, which, again, just my favorite records put on a record that I never thought would come out. I feel like I've had a really great life in music and continue to do so, which is all I could have ever hoped for. I really had a good time listening to Little Deuce Coupe because I was not really aware that A Young Man Is Gone was on it. And when it came on, it kind of blew my mind. So we're always learning. We're always taking in, musical illumination. That's why we're here yakking about music, because hopefully somebody will get excited about, these songs about piston rings and and carburetors and all of that, and go search it out and hear some really intriguing cross-references between cars and guitars.
Thank you so much for your time, Lenny and Dennis. I can't thank you both enough. Really, I had an amazing afternoon.
David, we had a really good time today.
It was fun. And to your question, what do I like better, Cars or the Beach Boys? They both get me where I want to go.
All right. I love you guys. That was I really enjoyed this.
All right, that about does it. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and my 6-year-old son. So don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member today by visiting patreon.com/Discograffiti. Stay tuned, because next week we've got an episode about what David Marks wound up doing for the rest of the 60s after leaving the Beach Boys, with special guest, Beach Boys author and David Marks biographer, John Stebbins. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat, because to discuss the classic live LP Beach Boys concert, I landed literally the perfect guest for the occasion. Beach Boys promoter and manager Fred Vale, who literally came up with the idea for the record itself during a time when live records were not an everyday concept. And it wound up being a crucial decision too, since it became their first #1 record. There will be a short sneak peek running for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the What Happened to David Marks After the Beach Boys podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everybody else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful son Mason, Lenny Kaye, Dennis Diken, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to leap headfirst into the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview. That's 181 and 182. My interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162. My epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137. My 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113. Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104. Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87. Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84. Sweetwater is episode 79. A tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78. Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74. Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68. Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60. Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod as 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, February 21st, we're coming at you with the wild and restless tale of David Marks after the Beach Boys with John Stebbins. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!